Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. Wanted to do another update on the forecast for our upcoming stretch, multi-day stretch of severe weather expected to really kick off tomorrow, going into at least Wednesday and Thursday from Texas into parts of the southeast. You can see a lot of colors there on the upcoming convective outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center, and we have a lot of severe weather that is expected to occur over the next several days. Nothing expected to be too intense at the moment, but of course we're still several days out from at least the middle and late portions of the event. So there are some details that need to be worked out, but in this video we're going to go over the forecast for the next few days, really dive into the next couple of days, Monday and Tuesday, April 8th and 9th, and then we'll talk briefly toward the end about the Wednesday and Thursday threat. Also wanted to do an update on the cloud forecast along the path of totality for tomorrow's total solar eclipse. We are just a day away from the much anticipated solar eclipse across parts of the U.S. Again, going to start just before 1:30 p.m. Central Time in southwest Texas, moving across parts of the Ozarks, Midwest, Great Lakes into the Northeast, ending right around 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time up there in Maine. There have been some tweaks in the models as far as the cloud forecast goes, so I wanted to go over some of those updates we've had since our last video a couple days ago. So we'll do that here to start things off in this video, and then we'll dive into the severe threat right afterward. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Let's first look at the Pivotal Weather Eclipse Forecasting tool, where we have a bunch of different ensemble models we can pick from and look at cloud cover on each of them. Now again, just a refresher on how this works. These are all going to be the mean of the last two consecutive runs of each of these ensembles. So you take, for example, this particular model, the last two runs of this model, they've taken the average of the total percentage of cloud cover across the U.S. And again, the blue colors mean more clouds, the whites and grays mean less clouds. And of course, the eclipse totality path is outlined in red here. So this first one is the short range ensemble forecast. So these are more your short range models instead of the GFS or the Euro, which are your more medium range models. These are your short range models, and they show us a pretty decent picture, kind of what we were talking about last time, with a little bit of that in between the GFS model and the Canadian model, which was kind of on two opposite ends of the spectrum, which you'll see here once again in just a second. But this is the short-range ensemble forecast system. Mean of the last two runs. This was the most recent run, which is at 4 a.m. today. And so we see a very similar look to what we saw last time in our last video. But we have had a little bit of improvement perhaps down here across parts of northeast Texas, including the DFW Metroplex, starting to see a little bit less cloud cover here on some of these models in this particular area. Last time we saw a lot of blue across that area, meaning pretty thick cloud cover, especially from low cloud cover across that area. If we go back in time, you'll see how that changed. So this is the 2 days ago, the 10 p.m. run of the Shref. You see a lot more blue there across the northeast Texas corridor. Now, not so much, and we've trended that way on this particular model over the last several runs up to our current model, which is showing a nice little gap there in northeast Texas up into Arkansas and then into parts of the Midwest. Now, we'll talk about the potential for cirrus overspreading this area here in just a second, but overall, this might be, for folks in the central southern plains, this might be your best bet to at least see the eclipse. Again, the cirrus clouds may be a little bit of a hindrance here, but I've also heard that they can actually enhance the viewing experience as well. So then we start getting into that area of eastern Ohio into western New York, dealing with a lot of cloud cover here. That's been pretty persistent over the last several model runs. We talked about that last time, how this particular area was not really looking all that great as far as eclipse viewing there in the eastern Great Lakes into parts of New York. Now up here in Maine, up into Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, that is still going to be your most slam dunk area, especially up in Maine. We've seen several runs now with Maine being fairly clear, and so that is probably going to be your slam dunk spot for clear skies. And then your second best option is going to be anywhere from here, the Midwest down into the Ozarks there in Arkansas, and perhaps now down into northeast Texas, as some of these models are coming in with a little bit better cloud cover forecast for that area. Still down in southwest Texas, we're dealing with a lot of cloud cover as the rich low-level moisture returns with our upcoming storm system, which we'll talk about when we go into the severe side of things here. So now let's look at the Canadian ensemble. Canadian ensemble has definitely been an outlier with this particular cloud forecast. Now, they have a note here that the CMC forecast, or the Canadian ensemble forecast, are the most nuanced and realistic available on this page. So that's what I've heard about this model, is that it does tend to be a little bit more favorable for cloud cover forecasts, although I've also heard that it does tend to struggle a little bit with upper level atmospheric moisture. So that would be your 300 millibar moisture, which we talked about last time being more favorable for cirrus formation. So here you see on the CMC, the Canadian model, that we have a pretty clear look, and this is what we saw last time as well. Pretty clear skies it's showing here, now from northeast Texas again, Dallas-Fort Worth area, northeastward into Arkansas, southeast Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. That is looking like a pretty clear corridor on the Canadian model, and that's what we were seeing last time. Let's go back a few runs and see how things have changed. So we go back here to several runs previous. This is from the 4th, April 4th, 3 days ago at 7 a.m. Much of the same here. A little bit of improvement currently with that North Texas corridor, but still we were seeing pretty clear skies up here from Arkansas northeastward into the Midwest on our previous models. And not much has changed since then. We still have that corridor there across the eastern Great Lakes into New York, where we're seeing that cloud cover pretty stubborn there, and then the far northeast reaches of the country, particularly Maine, still looking like your best shot at cloud-free skies. How about the GFS ensemble? This is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, and it does note here that the cloud cover forecast for the American ensemble, which is the GFS, tend to overestimate coverage where the sky will only be partly cloudy, while its cloud thickness and precipitation forecasts are realistic and useful. So take this with a grain of salt, and I said that on yesterday's post on my social media pages, that GFS is definitely looking like an outlier scenario in this case. You see a bunch of cloud cover here from the Midwest all the way down into Texas and really up into the Northeast, with just, again, Maine being that kind of corridor where we're seeing very limited cloud cover there. But the GFS, definitely an outlier scenario on the high end of cloud cover across much of the path, and I don't think that's going to be realistic. But we did note there, the Pivotal Weather folks did note here that the cloud thickness forecasts are usually pretty good. So let's take a look at that. So this is going to be the approximate percentage of possible solar radiation that is blocked by cloud cover. So again, blues are going to mean more cloud cover thickness and more solar radiation blocked, and the whites and grays are going to be less cloud cover blocking that solar radiation. So again, the Texas, southwest and central Texas corridor still socked in with a lot of clouds here on this forecast, but northeast Texas looking at about 23 to 33% of solar radiation blocked. That's not too bad. And then going up to the northeast, even farther into Arkansas and then the Midwest, we're seeing very low percentages of solar radiation blocked, which means very thin cloud cover. So that is going to mean that along this corridor, even though the GFS was showing quite a bit of cloud cover itself in this corridor, that might not actually be the case, and we might actually have just very limited or thin clouds not blocking too much solar radiation, which might not be too detrimental to the overall viewing of the eclipse. Let's go to the NWS blend here. This is the in-house National Weather Service blend of models. And so this is what they are showing, pretty much right in the middle of those observations, very close to the short-range ensemble forecast. Lots of cloud cover. They do have quite a bit of cloud cover reaching that Red River vicinity in northeast Texas. And then up into Arkansas in the Midwest, a little bit of cloud cover there to deal with, but that could, again, perhaps be because of cirrus. So it's probably going to be, again, your second best bet behind the Northeast being your best shot. So lots of trends here starting to emerge and become solidified here as we get closer to this event. Number one, looks like that corridor from Vermont to Maine, especially up there, the farther northeast you go in Maine, that looks to be the slam dunk spot for clear skies for this eclipse. Then down, your second takeaway from this is that parts of Texas, probably Dallas-Fort Worth, southwestward, and that, again, could change a little bit north, a little bit south, depending on how things go tomorrow, but much of the southwestern portions of the path in the U.S. there in Texas going to be socked in with clouds, as will be that area from probably far eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania into western New York, eastern Great Lakes, up into the perhaps even as far as central and eastern New York there, could be socked in with some cloud cover there. And then in the middle looks to be kind of that area where we might see a little bit of cloud cover seeping in, but it might not be too detrimental to overall eclipse viewing. One more tool we can look at is the NAM run from this morning, showing the cloud cover. This is just the total percentage of cloud cover, and we see a little bit of a sweet spot there from Arkansas down into northeast Texas, quite a bit of breaks there in the cloud cover percentage there in northeast Texas on this NAM run, a little bit more up there in the Midwest, and then that area in the northeast still socked there in with clouds, so that looks to be very, very consistent among the models. And then the up there in Maine, again, your slam dunk spot. So the models are starting to converge on a bit of a solution. Again, the GFS tends to be a little bit of an outlier. What has my attention is that they do say that the Canadian ensemble is pretty darn good with forecasting cloud cover, and they have pretty clear skies, but this also does seem to be a bit of an outlier as far as having very clear skies, much clearer than some of the other models across this corridor. Now, another tool we can use here is the high-resolution ensemble forecast system. They have a tool here. If you go to the SPC href page, just Google search SPC href, and you'll see that first link. If you go under Synoptic and you go down to cloud cover mean, this shows you the cloud cover. This is a really cool tool that you can use. And this discriminates between low-level, mid-level, and high-level clouds, where the blue colors are low-level clouds, green is going to be mid-level clouds, and red are going to be high-level clouds, such as your cirrus clouds. And again, we talked about last time, your low and mid-level clouds tend to be your thicker clouds, your stratus clouds, those low clouds, low thick clouds that tend to stream northward when moisture is returning it, which is going to be the situation as we go into tomorrow ahead of this severe weather setup. And your higher clouds are going to be your cirrus clouds, those thinner clouds that may not be quite as detrimental to the overall viewing of the eclipse depending on their thickness. So if we go up here to 18Z tomorrow, which is going to be 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, you'll see what the high-resolution ensemble forecast has as the mean cloud cover percentage. And again, the high-resolution ensemble just takes into, that's basically all of our cams, the HRRR, the NAM 3 kilometer, the WRF ARW, NSSL WRF, and so on and so forth. So this takes into account all of those models and puts it into an ensemble, and the average cloud cover percentage is taken and shown on this map, and again, discriminated among the levels of clouds. And we can toggle off the different cloud cover different levels here. So we'll start here with the blue. That is our low-level cloud cover. And you see quite a bit of low-level cloud cover here across the Texas portion of the path. That's why the Texas portion going to be pretty socked in with clouds, especially the farther southwest you go. As again, as we talked about last video, and as we'll talk about with our severe threat upcoming toward the latter half of this video, we'll have quite a bit of moisture return coming in off the Gulf, and that usually provides a pretty good opportunity for there to be some pretty healthy low cloud cover along with that low-level moisture return. So that's why much of Texas is going to be under the gun for that cloud cover. Now, northeast Texas not looking too bad. Again, we're starting to see some hope for that northeast Texas portion and southeast Oklahoma portion of the path. That could be a little bit of a more favorable look than what we were seeing previously. But that low cloud cover will continue to stream northward here over the day tomorrow, going into the early afternoon by the time of the eclipse. But we could see some of that burn off as we have. If we have any breaks in the clouds or anything, that will be favorable. But if they don't really burn off, I saw a tweet from NWS Dallas today. They said if the low clouds don't really burn off by noon or so, historically, that usually means that they'll stick around through the eclipse. And so that'll be something to watch as we go into the day tomorrow. But low clouds farther to the northeast up from Arkansas into the Midwest do not look to be an issue. We'll go into some of the meteorology behind that here in just a second. But overall, the cloud forecast here for low, thick clouds from Arkansas into the Midwest looking pretty good. Low clouds up here in that eastern Great Lakes region, which is why that is not going to be your favorable area for viewing. And then up in the northeast looking pretty good. Let's toggle on the mid-level clouds. So the mid-level clouds, we start to see some of that mid-level, perhaps cumulus, some cirrus building in there. Again, cirrus is mostly your upper-level clouds. But we do see some streaks of mid-level clouds starting to overspread the region out ahead of the trough that's coming in up there into southern Missouri, far northern Arkansas perhaps, and some down here coinciding with that low cloud cover there in Texas. So again, not too bad here. This shouldn't be too thick, I wouldn't think. Your percentages, the lighter the colors scheme here, the lesser the cloud cover here from these particular levels of cloud. So we're seeing very wispy, very light green colors here, meaning very limited mid-level clouds perhaps streaming in as progged by the ensemble models here. Up in the northeast, once again, that could be a hindering factor up there as well. Northeast up there in Maine, farther to the northeast remaining clear. Now let's toggle on our high-level clouds, and I'm going to take off the other two here. And this is what's going to be the potential bugaboo for the middle portion of the country, from Arkansas up into the Midwest here. You see a lot of red here overspreading the area, and that is indicative of high-level cloud cover, which again is your cirrus clouds. So those wispy high-level clouds. The darker reds are going to be your thicker cirrus, or more of the sky obstructed by your cirrus clouds, and the lighter reds are not going to be quite as much cloud cover percentage. So you see here across northern Arkansas into the southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, Indiana portion of the path. Definitely seeing some overspreading of cirrus, and it's all going to depend on how thick that cirrus is. If we see a really thick layer of cirrus, and we'll talk about that here with some soundings in just a second. If we see a thick layer of cirrus in the upper levels of the atmosphere, that may not be too favorable for viewing. If we see a little bit more thin layer of cirrus, then that would probably not be too much of a detriment to viewing. But we're going to have to monitor that as we go into tomorrow, as we won't have any low clouds to deal with, which is good, but we could have some wispy high cirrus, and it all depends on how thick those cirrus are in this region. Down here in southeast Oklahoma, northeast Texas, southwest Arkansas, a little bit lighter colors there, potentially perhaps a sweet spot coming together right in the Arklatex area for potential decent viewing. But again, we'll have to see how far those low clouds advance to the north going into the early afternoon hours tomorrow. All right, let's take a look now at a couple of models and look at the relative humidity as we go up in the atmosphere. We did this last time, and it basically shows us where our moist air is within the atmosphere. We're going to go up all the way from 925 millibars up to 300 millibars. So again, those low-level clouds are going to be those associated with that robust moisture return, perhaps some low stratus, some cumulus perhaps, and then your upper level clouds where there is high relative humidity. That means a lot of cirrus. So we'll start at 925 millibars on the 12Z GFS. This is valid for 18Z, 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, right before the eclipse is set to begin in southwest Texas. And you can see quite a bit of low-level moisture here across the southwestern portions of the path. And that is why I'm maybe a little skeptical about the clearing up here that is being modeled in the northeastern portions of Texas, right there in the Arklatex vicinity. It depends. It's going to depend on how far that warm front advances northward and how much clutter we're going to have north of that warm front as it advances northward. So that'll be something to watch as we go into the day tomorrow, but ample moisture in the low levels here, not so much as you go off to the northeast, and then into the northeast, limited moisture. We do see some return there from low-level moisture, but not enough really to promote widespread cloud coverage. 850 millibars, much of the same, bit of drier air here up in the middle portion of the path there, northern Arkansas into Indiana, with a lot more low-level moisture down here to the south, which makes sense given our moisture return from our severe threat tomorrow. And then northeast looking like a little bit of low-level moisture, but not enough to impact cloud cover. 700 millibars. Pretty dry across the entirety of the path here, except again that stubborn area in the eastern Great Lakes, western New York. Well, that's going to be pretty tough to get a really good view up there in western New York around the Buffalo area. But everywhere else, pretty decent lack of moisture there at 700 millibars, 500 millibars, much of the same, and then 300 millibars where we're looking for our cirrus, and the GFS does have quite a bit of cirrus overspreading the region ahead of our incoming trough. You can see the blues here are our higher relative humidities, near 100% there, overspreading the region from maybe far northern Arkansas into Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, down into much of Texas. Maybe a little bit of a sweet spot there of a lack of upper level moisture there along the Arklatex northeastward into north central Arkansas. But elsewhere, it looks like a lot of cirrus overspreading the path. Now, again, this is the GFS, so we can take the cloud coverage with a little bit of a grain of salt. And again, we're going to have to wait and see how this cloud cover, how thick that cirrus is over those areas where low-level moisture is not going to be an issue. So we'll take a look at some soundings here in just a second. But here is the European model. So this is the 12Z Euro that's coming in as we are recording here. We'll go down to 925 millibars to start. Again, lots of low-level moisture here. Pretty dry up there in northern Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, even into parts of Indiana and Ohio. A little bit of low-level moisture, but again, not enough to impact cloud coverage. 850 millibars here. Same thing. Now, the European model has a little bit drier air staying farther south into Texas. That would allow for maybe some a little bit more of a lack of low-level clouds there across east Texas, Arklatex, southeast Oklahoma, western Arkansas. And then the rest of the path looking pretty good, except for that eastern Great Lakes area. 700 millibars. Much of the same, pretty dry air there at 700 millibars through much of the path. Here we are at 500 and then 300. So the European model does have quite a bit of cirrus here in a stretch from west Texas into northern Arkansas. Down to the south, not so much there. Much of Arkansas pretty clear. That northeast Texas corridor pretty clear. So the European model, even though it doesn't have a specific cloud cover percentage product, we can deduce here that we may have a little bit of clearing here. This might be one of those models that is showing a little bit more hope for that Arklatex region there down toward the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Off to the north, though, a lot more cirrus there, southeast Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, having to deal with that there. And then up there into the northeast, into New York, And then, again, your slam dunk looks to be Maine still at pretty clear skies. I'm going to go back to the GFS, and we'll take a few soundings here just to get an idea along the path. Let me go to our cloud cover map, as that has the eclipse path overlaid on it. So this, again, is at 1 p.m. tomorrow. We'll start here in southwest Texas, right on the center line. And you'll see the reason why we're dealing with quite a bit of cloud cover there. Ample low-level moisture there in the low levels of the atmosphere. The red profile, again, is your temperature profile. Green profile is your dew point profile as you go up in the atmosphere. Your temperature dew point spread, we want to see that for clouds. That needs to be about 5 degrees Celsius or less. So when these are really, for simplicity's sake, when these two lines are very, very close together, that's when you're likely to have some cloud cover. And we see that here in the low levels, and a very thick layer here in the upper levels of the atmosphere. A lot of mid and upper level clouds, really from about 500 millibars or 450 millibars or so north upward to about 200 millibars, which would be a thick layer of mid and upper level cloud cover, along with that low level cloud cover, making that southwest Texas portion pretty unfavorable for viewing. How about up here in northeast Texas? We'll take one there right around the Paris, Texas area. And here's a little bit better. We see a little bit of low-level moisture. That might not be too much of an issue as we do start to dry out there right above 900 millibars or so, 850 millibars starting to dry out there. Lots of dry air in the mid and upper levels, and we do see a little bit of cirrus potentially there between 200 and 300 millibars, but not nearly as thick as it was down to the southwest. So perhaps a little bit of hope there for that northeast Texas corridor into southeast Oklahoma. How about northern Arkansas? This is northern Arkansas, and that is looking pretty good, except for this little layer of potential cirrus there right above 300 millibars. Not all that thick, but so not going to be probably too detrimental up there in that area, but lots of dry air here in the mid and lower levels of the atmosphere, leading to a lack of cloud cover there. So definitely not looking quite as detrimental up here, even though we may have a little bit of cirrus to deal with up there in northern Arkansas. How about, let's go to the Illinois-Indiana border there. Much of the same, a little bit thicker cirrus up there, which is what a lot of the models were showing, a little bit thicker layer of cirrus there surrounding 300 millibars. Not much low-level moisture and mid-level moisture to deal with, so mostly going to be a cirrus issue up there into Illinois and Indiana, and it could be a little bit thicker than areas farther east. So it's looking like that northern Arkansas corridor perhaps is going to be your best shot for those folks looking to set up somewhere in the middle portions of the path in the U.S. How about western New York, where that stubborn plume of clouds were, and that's why. You can see the very saturated mid-levels there, lower mid-levels, up above 850 millibars to about 600 millibars or so, very, very saturated in that layer. That is going to be pretty unfavorable for viewing conditions in that region. And then up in Maine, you'll see why it's looking super favorable there. Very dry air all the way up through the atmosphere. Dew point depressions really greater than 5 all the way up through the column, so that is going to lead to a pretty slam dunk look for Maine as far as cloud cover goes. So that's going to do it for the eclipse portion of the video here. Now let's move on to the severe side of things. All right, let's dive into the severe side of things. We have a multi-day stretch of severe weather starting today, but really kicking into gear tomorrow, Monday, April 8th, through at least Wednesday and Thursday of this week from parts of Texas into the southeast. We do have a severe threat today, a couple different areas of severe potential today, one in Iowa, there for maybe a chance of a brief tornado or two, and then a large marginal risk with a small slight risk area centered on the Mississippi River Delta, kind of in the Missouri Boot Heel, far western Kentucky, northwest Tennessee area. Threat for maybe a slightly higher tornado risk in that region, as well as some large hail and damaging winds, but it is going to remain mostly a low-end threat today before we kick things into gear tomorrow. Not going to focus on today's threat in this video. We're going to focus on the bulk of this severe weather sequence, which again will begin tomorrow across parts of Oklahoma and Texas. The SPC has just upgraded to an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 for tomorrow, Monday, April 8th, in the orange shaded region here, southwest Oklahoma, northwest and north Texas, including places like Wichita Falls and the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, right on the edge between the enhanced risk and the slight risk. Large slight risk does extend outward from there, including places like Waco, Lufkin, Shreveport, Fort Sill, all the way up to the Oklahoma City metro area under the gun for that slight risk area tomorrow. All hazards on the table in kind of a multiple different areas of severe potential. The tornado threat going to focus on the eastern portions of the risk from north central and central Texas eastward toward the Louisiana-Texas border, includes the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Waco, Lufkin, Shreveport in that 5% tornado risk area. 2% surrounds that. And then we'll have the potential for damaging wind and large hail. The greatest threat for large hail is going to be displaced off to the west from the main tornado threat here in the 30% hatched area. Could see some 2 to 3 plus inch diameter hailstones out there in a somewhat separate region of convection out in here. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. But overall, in the entire risk, we do have the threat for some large to very large hail in the yellow and red hatched areas there. That is for tomorrow. Then we move into Tuesday, April 9th, with another large risk area, slight risk here at this time, from parts of west central Texas eastward into the Texas Hill Country, into Louisiana and the Mississippi River Valley there between Louisiana and Mississippi. Large slight risk area. We do have a 15% hatched area that exists for the potential for possibly significant severe weather across the center of the risk. Dallas-Fort Worth down the I-35 corridor, Austin, San Antonio, Waco, Lufkin, all the way down toward Houston under the gun for that greatest, perhaps significant severe threat on Tuesday. Then we go into Wednesday and Thursday. They have outlined risk areas here as well. Wednesday, April 10th, here across the East Texas into the southeast, and then we go into Thursday, day 5. The threat continues for the southeast and eastern seaboard states. So very long duration severe threat here. It is a pretty complex threat at that. So we're going to start off by looking at the next couple of days. We'll use our NAM forecast model for that, and then we'll go into some of our more medium range models to look at the potential solutions for Wednesday and Thursday. Of course, we're still a few days out from the Wednesday and Thursday threat, so things will change, and we don't have a great idea of how things will play out then, but we'll at least briefly touch on the possible threats for Wednesday and Thursday. So let's go ahead and dive into some current data. This is our current SPC mesoanalysis data at 500 millibars. Pretty interesting pattern across the country. Here's a little wound up, tightly wound trough, closed low here, moving across the north central plains into the Midwest, helping to initiate that severe threat for today. We also have a big trough that is exiting out here into the Atlantic, and then this little curvature in the flow. That's going to replace this troughiness here in the central portion of the country. That's going to continue to dig down and kind of become a cutoff closed low here over the desert southwest before ejecting into the southern portions of the country. That is going to be our main synoptic scale feature that is going to initiate severe weather, especially on Tuesday through Thursday. Monday we'll have just broad southwesterly flow well ahead of this trough with some little ripples in there rotating through the flow that will help initiate storms there on Monday. But for Tuesday through Thursday, that trough will start to inch its way in and will be the main synoptic forcing mechanism for storms for the latter portion of the event. At the surface, associated with this closed low here in the central plains, we have a nice tight surface low there, pretty much an occluded low at this point, meaning that the cold front has caught up to the warm front. If we were to draw in our warm front, it would look something like that. Perhaps cold front kind of looks like this, and you can see here close to the low, that cold front's pretty much overtaken that warm front, meaning that we have a nice occluded cyclone here. Ahead of the cold front today going to be our main threat for severe weather, both up in Iowa and then along the Mississippi River Valley there. Again, a low-end threat today. But this surface low going to move off to the east and get out of our way. And as you might expect, we have kind of this cold front draped down into the southern plains. Easterly or westerly to northerly flow here across much of the plains, but it has not scoured moisture out completely. So we're not going to be dealing with one of those setups where we're not going to be able to get moisture in here in time. Our moisture is sitting here. You can see the winds over the Gulf have started to shift out of the east here, starting to bring that moisture into parts of southeast Texas. So we have a nice reservoir of moisture ready to get pulled northward as we get secondary surface low development as this nice new trough comes in and sits over the southwest and then eventually ejects over the southern portion of the U.S. So that is what we have going on right now. This is at the surface. Let me refresh this. So again, a lot of westerly to northerly flow here across the region, but it's not going to be very intense northerly or westerly flow, really pushing that moisture out. What you can see here along the Texas coast, 60s and even 70s dew points sitting there across southeast Texas and over the Gulf. So that is getting ready to be pulled northward as we get secondary surface low development here somewhere out here in probably eastern New Mexico, west Texas over the coming couple of days. And we'll have plenty of moisture for our severe threat come tomorrow through the rest of the week. Let's go into some model data now. This is the 12Z NAM from this morning, And we're just going to look at the NAM for these first couple of days as we are in NAM range. Not going to do our typical multi-model look here, just in the sake of time, since we did spent the first half of the video on the Eclipse forecast. But here is the 500 millibar pattern on the 12Z NAM as it was initialized. Again, closed low here over the central U.S., and there is our trough starting to take shape here over the west coast. You can see as we go into the next day or so, that trough really starts to dig down into the desert southwest and kind of closes off, becomes a little bit of a cutoff low, stops moving east so much, and kind of just sits there for a couple of days. So this is what we have for tomorrow, Monday at 7 p.m. Central. The upper trough centered well back to the west over parts of Arizona. Strong flow rounding the base of the trough, but we have this kind of subtropical jet plume of stronger flow starting to impinge upon Texas here toward the latter half of tomorrow. And perhaps a little bit of curvature here in the flow that will allow us to get that synoptic forcing mechanism for severe weather. At 700 millibars, we see a little bit more of a kink there in the height contours rotating through, helping to provide a little bit of extra forcing for severe storms tomorrow. Mostly going to be a warm advection regime type setup tomorrow. As that surface low starts to develop out here to the west, we'll get those winds to really start pumping that moisture northward into the Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana region. And along that strong warm advection regime, we will get that storm initiation to happen, focusing kind of on the warm front, given somewhat of a lack of larger, deeper synoptic forcing for ascent. So that is Monday, and then Tuesday we start to see that trough eject off to the east. We're still going to be a little bit weird with the timing here. The overall exit region of this trough probably still well back in here. So this is at 7 p.m. Tuesday, so maybe a little bit weird on the timing, but we'll still have plenty of forcing for ascent out here across this region for a severe threat on Tuesday. So let's go ahead and look at Monday and see how the moisture goes. I'll back it up to our current time, our surface pattern, how it will evolve. So currently, surface low located across parts of the central to north central plains, going to eject off to the east today and lose some steam as we go into tomorrow. Then again, as we talked about, we're going to get secondary surface low development. This is at 4 p.m. tomorrow. You can see the winds shift out of the south-southeast, ready to pump that moisture northward ahead of this very broad cyclone. Not really a tight cyclone yet because that trough's still sitting well out here to the west, but we have enough southwesterly flow traversing the higher terrain out to the west to get at least broad cyclogenesis out to the west across eastern New Mexico and west Texas to, again, make those winds in the warm sector out of the south and southeast to pump that moisture northward and give us some low-level and deep layer shear for a severe threat. So then we go into Tuesday, and the surface low really doesn't tighten up all that much. We maybe see a little bit of tightening out here across southwest Texas, but a somewhat similar pattern to Monday on Tuesday, perhaps not quite as favorable ingredients, and then the low will start to shift off to the east a little bit. So let's look at moisture here. As we talked about, the moisture is just kind of sitting there off the Texas, right along the Texas coast into southeast Texas. So we'll start currently, and so we've already had 60s dew points as initialized this morning pulled up to the Arklatex region. So plenty of moisture in place already. So it's not going to take much to get that moisture over a broad region here for the Monday severe threat. And you can see what happens. The cold front continues to push east for today's severe threat, kind of shunting that moisture off to the east a little bit, but still we don't see any sweeping of that moisture out into the Gulf. The cold front kind of just moves off to the east and northeast and doesn't really affect this reservoir of moisture sitting along the Texas coast. And then by tomorrow morning, we start to really see that moisture get pulled northwards, 60s and 70s dew points across a broad area from west central and central Texas eastward into the mid-south. So this is 4 p.m. tomorrow. We see 50s dew points well back in here, out across West Texas into southwest Oklahoma. That is going to foster that other severe threat there. Additionally, away from our main tornado threat here in the central and eastern portions of the risk, that will foster enough moisture for a severe threat out there, given the stronger flow starting to impinge upon the region. But our main, more robust severe threat is probably going to be out in here. The potential for large hail and damaging winds and a few tornadoes out here as well. So with this setup, low-level jet's going to be somewhat weak, but later in the period we will start to see a little bit of a plume overspread the region, 30 to 40 knots of low-level jet there with some increase after dark. So that could foster that tornado threat as we go later on into the afternoon and early evening and into the nighttime hours tomorrow. But let's take a couple soundings out ahead of this. You can see the broad warm sector here. And so our warm front, let's put in our fronts here. So the warm front looks to be, so our surface low, broad surface low out in here. So our warm front, if I were to put it in a certain area, a little bit tough to tell, fairly diffuse, probably, there's there might even be two different warm fronts in here. A lot of times in these setups here in the southern portion of the U.S., you'll get your main warm front to the north, your synoptic warm front, and then you'll get this kind of secondary warm front. I've heard people call it a marine warm front. Just the northern edge of the real robust moisture. You can see that we have a warm sector extending up here into Oklahoma, but our main moisture is down here across the Red River southward. So that's probably your quote-unquote marine front. Your synoptic warm front's probably up in here. But this more marine warm front, if you will, is probably going to be our main focusing mechanism for storms. And then south of that in the warm advection regime will probably be your best bet for additional storms as well. So let's go down here. We'll take a sounding 4 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central tomorrow. And we'll take one here just east of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and maybe one down here into east central Texas, the piney woods down there of east central Texas. So here we go, east of Dallas-Fort Worth, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time tomorrow. So this is going to be just a kind of late afternoon as the storms are going to get going. So here we go. Plenty of instability, looks like. Deep moisture up above 850 millibars, 81 over 67 at the surface. So very rich and warm low levels there. With some drier air aloft, which may impinge, may kind of be a little bit of a factor in reducing somewhat the instability in this environment. But overall, 2,500 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE and a deep low-level moist layer should be able to overcome that. So deep moisture, steep lapse rates aloft, and a very nice thermodynamics in the low levels. But initially, you'll see what happens here. Our hodographs are mostly straight, not a ton of curvature at all. Our low-level winds very, very weak, not much strengthening and veering of those low-level winds with height. That is going to lead to a pretty much a large hail and damaging wind threat for the main portions, at least the early portions of the setup going into the late afternoon hours. Plenty of instability, strong deep layer shear for supercells, effective bulk shear, about 50 knots with limited low-level shear. That is a nice combination for some large hail. Same thing down to the south, very nice looking thermodynamic profile here, very deep moisture down to the south, extending up above 700 millibars, very, very deep moisture with those dew points at the surface in the 70s. But still very limited low-level shear amid deep layer shear favorable for supercells, so that is going to favor a large hail threat with those storms moving in off the Gulf. Again, we'll have a separate area back in here, southwest Oklahoma into northwest Texas. This is at 0Z, where we'll have additional supercells fire. Low-level moisture, more limited out here, but we will have plenty of deep layer shear for supercells. And we'll probably see a few storms fire in southwest Oklahoma and move in northwest Texas, moving off to the east going into the early evening hours. This is the profile out there at 7 p.m. Very well mixed boundary layer. These storms will be fairly high based out there, so the tornado threat definitely limited out in that region given limited low-level moisture. But plenty of instability to support a severe threat, steep lapse rates aloft, limited low-level shear as well with strong deep layer shear for supercells. That will support a large to very large hail out there. That's where that 30% hatched area for hail is out in that southwest Oklahoma, northwest Texas corridor. So very large hail, damaging winds going to be the main threat in that secondary area out in that region. Wichita Falls, south of Lawton, Oklahoma, that area under the gun for that greatest hail threat tomorrow as those supercells move off to the east. Out in here, though, large hail, a few tornadoes possible, especially as the low-level jet ramps up here. Let me put the 850 millibar flow on, and I'll take a sounding right here, just south of I-20 there, southwest of Shreveport in East Texas, the Piney Woods, and you can see how the environment improves as that low-level jet improves. Still plenty of instability for a severe threat, 1,700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Very saturated low levels, which may be a hindrance, although this could be just a NAM thing with its too cool surface temperature bias. But overall, very deep low-level moisture and thermodynamics favorable for robust updrafts, and our low-level shear does start to increase at this point. Nice strengthening and veering of those low-level winds with height, leading to large hodograph curvature and strong deep layer shear for supercells. So that is fostering about 300 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. Plenty of low-level shear now for a tornado threat as we go toward sunset and after sunset. Now, a storm mode is going to be an issue here because we don't really have a focusing mechanism on the dry line. That's going to be well back to the west. We're going to be really just this warm advection regime and focused along the marine/warm front there into the Red River southward here. So I do have a feeling we're going to have a lot of areas of convection, a lot of rounds of convection here, and it may tend to get a little bit on the messy side. Let me draw in our warm front here just for argument's sake here, let's draw it in right there. And we'll just have, again, lots of warm convection going, very saturated low-level air mass, and our shear vectors. The warm front won't necessarily be our initiating boundary per se, but we will see, you can see the shear vectors very much parallel to that boundary. So we'll probably have a lot of convection going up south of the warm front in East Texas, and then a lot of it training along that warm front, given that the shear vectors are really parallel to that warm front. So that makes me think the storm mode will tend to be quite messy tomorrow, but we still do have plenty of low-level shear for tornadoes as the event progresses into the early evening, and initially any discrete updrafts will have a large hail and damaging wind threat. But I do think more of a clustered mode is likely to take place. Let's see some of the models for tomorrow, our cams for tomorrow. This is the 12Z HER, and so we'll see what the radar looks like here on the 12Z HER going into tomorrow. So you see a lot of those little beans coming ashore, and they start to get robust there by about 3, 4, 5 p.m., and there's our second round of supercells back in here, initiating about the same time there, northwest Texas, southwest Oklahoma, much more discrete back in there. The initiating mechanism will probably be the intersection of the warm front and dry line, so your shear vector is much more perpendicular to the dry line. So a little bit more discrete supercell activity out there, whereas here on the warm front and in that warm convection regime of East Texas, northern Louisiana, much more clustered mode. You can see a little bit more discreteness in the updrafts there in northwest Texas. Again, very large hail, damaging winds, the main threats there. And then here, a little bit messier as storms kind of train along the warm front, and you have multiple rounds of warm advection storms going up there. So I think the storm mode will preclude a greater event there, but you see the convection kind of conglomerate into one, couple of different bands there, and just a real messy mode as we get into Tuesday morning, excuse me. So speaking of Tuesday, let's talk about Tuesday. So I'm going to back out here to our 500 millibars and our CONUS sector. So here we go into Tuesday. This is Monday evening. Here's our trough centered over western Arizona, and that starts to eject into the southern plains in Mexico as we go into the day on Tuesday. So here we are, 4 p.m. Tuesday, 7 p.m. Tuesday. Trough centered out here close to the El Paso area, broad belt of strong southwesterly flow in the exit region of this trough. So we will be able to have enough forcing for severe storms out here on Tuesday. We also will have to watch any of these outflow boundaries from the ongoing convection Monday into Tuesday, as they could leave a boundary which, as we know, could be a focus for potential enhancement of the severe threat along it if those do develop with the remaining convection Tuesday morning. So plenty of forcing for severe storms on the synoptic scale. Let's go down to the surface and see how the surface features progress once again. We already showed it, but let's go over it once more. So broad surface flow out here Monday evening, nice southerly and southeasterly flow in the warm sector, and just overall not really a strong focus for severe storms. You can see on the NAM here where that morning convection has kind of pushed the effective warm front and outflow. You can see the cooler temperatures, those lighter yellows to the north here, darker oranges to the south. So there's your kind of outflow reinforced warm front, which will probably be a focusing mechanism. So for sure that will have to be watched where that warm front ends up and any outflow boundaries in the warm sector. But just kind of still broad cyclogenesis here, broad surface cyclone in southwest Texas there. I'm not a huge fan, at least from a chasing perspective, of these kind of nebulous low-level patterns. You really want to see those tight surface lows, tight dry line, warm front, your boundaries. Here it's a little bit on the nebulous side, especially muddied by ongoing convection Tuesday morning. Usually that leads to a little bit less of a focus for severe storms instead of, saying, here, you got to go to the dry line or the triple point. That's your exact place you need to go. Here, oftentimes this leads to just kind of scattered convection, not really a focus for that convection, and it can sometimes lead to more messy modes. We will have, I believe, a weaker low-level jet on this day as well. We do have a little bit of a plume out here in southeast Texas, south of the warm front, so that could foster a bit of a tornado threat there in southeast Texas, but I think the storm mode will be a little bit on the messier side as well here, given some of the same issues that we had on Monday. The shear vectors very much parallel to the outflow reinforced warm front. If we have storms that continue into Tuesday afternoon, that could continue to push that warm front south and really reinforce that warm front and warm sector south. But you can see here the shear vector is very much parallel to the warm front once again, which will probably be a focusing mechanism for those storms. And again, a lot of warm advection out there ahead of the broad surface cyclone. Moisture, once again, though, not going to be an issue, but you can see how much that warm front sags southward with that ongoing convection on Tuesday morning. Let's take a sounding 4 p.m. here. We'll probably have, so we may have storms, much better moisture now along the dry line, which probably will be a forcing mechanism for storms. Back to the west, not quite as much low-level jet to deal with, so storms along the dry line probably will have a large hail and damaging wind threat most of all. This is going to be at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Right along the dry line, then we'll take one out here in the open warm sector, kind of in the, College Station area, perhaps. So this is going to be along the dry line. Once again, very strong instability, but very weak low-level shear. Strong deep layer shear for supercells as the trough swings through, but overall this would be much more of a large hail threat given very weak low-level flow and limited low-level shear. So very much a large hail threat with those storms. Out in the open warm sector, if we can get storms to fire in the open warm sector, they would have much more of a tornado threat there. You can see much more curvature there in the photographs there, strong veering and strengthening winds with height. A little bit of a capping inversion that remains in the open warm sector. That could be from some semblance of elevated mixed layer getting advected over the region. And we could have some capping in the open warm sector given that the trough is a little bit farther back to the west. Forcing mechanism along the dry line, trough starting to impinge in this area. We're a little bit farther removed from the trough out in here, so that could mean a little bit more stubborn capping out here in the open warm sector, but that could just be a NAM thing as well. As we know, the NAM has a bias for too cool surface temperatures. It looks like a 78 degrees surface temperature, so if we can get into the 80s, that probably won't be as much of an issue. But the low-level jet certainly is stronger out here to the west, so that would foster a tornado threat with storms in the open warm sector if they would be able to be surface-based. But back here along the dry line, your main initiating boundary, not so much of a low-level jet to deal with, so much more of a large hail and damaging wind threat there. Again, we'll have to watch for any outflow boundaries if they can get in the warm sector, and also the outflow reinforced warm front. Always tough to forecast these outflow reinforced warm fronts because many times the models will show it stalling, but you'll have continued convection north of it throughout the day, and that will just allow that warm front to continue to sag southward and really not allow any storms to focus along it. But we'll take a sounding here along the warm front just to see what the environment along the front is like. Of course, likely to be enhanced low-level shear along the front. Not maybe a little bit, not so much, still pretty chaotic there. So I think mostly a large hail damaging wind threat on Tuesday, especially along the dry line, but anything that can form out in the open warm sector will have that threat for a few tornadoes. And then the threat shifts east as the trough really starts to swing through on Wednesday. We can look at the NAM here for Wednesday, and that trough really starts to swing through. I think it will be mostly an MCS. On Wednesday, you'll have your initial convection from Tuesday moving off to the east into Louisiana and Mississippi, and then perhaps another round back here along the dry line cold front composite boundary as we go into Wednesday as that trough really swings through, takes on a little bit more of a neutral tilt, and your forcing really starts to overspread that warm sector. So probably 2 rounds of convection on Wednesday, along probably renewed convection behind the morning round along the dry line, and then you'll have your storms moving into Louisiana and Mississippi with a continued tornado and damaging wind threat there. So a little bit more complex on Wednesday and Thursday. Here is the GFS. We'll see how the GFS plays out, more of our medium range modeling. Very much a similar situation to the NAM. That trough really swings through on Wednesday. Some differences in the trough positioning, it looks like. The NAM is definitely well back to the west of the GFS. A little bit different geometry there, but the overall idea is the same. Your strongest flow is well out here to the west. I tend to think that the GFS is being a little bit more progressive with the pattern. So let's look at the dew points there, see where our warm sector is, and you can see the warm sector well out to the east, whereas the NAM was much farther back to the west. So we are seeing quite a bit of spread among the models at this point. So there's the NAM, GFS, NAM, much farther west than the GFS. So lots of discrepancy still for Wednesday and Thursday, but I would suspect as that trough starts to take on a little bit better geometry, we'll have a nice, strong, low-level jet out ahead of it. So that initial convection, that initial line moving in from Tuesday, will continue to have that damaging wind and tornado threat as it moves east. May start to outrun the warm sector, depending on where that warm sector ends up. But we may have renewed convection along the dry line cold front, but with your low-level jet so much more displaced off to the east, that may allow for any storms back here along the cold front to be a little bit more of a damaging wind risk. Probably strong forcing, so more of a squall line there, but limited low-level shear back to the west, whereas out to the eastern portion of the warm sector will have a much different kinematic profile. that would be favorable for tornadoes. Yeah, very strong low-level shear there, plenty of instability. So any storms that will continue into the afternoon in the eastern portions of the warm sector will have that very strong low-level shear to work with. So we'll have to watch how that plays out Wednesday into Thursday. Then the threat shifts into Thursday in portions of the southeast and eastern seaboard. And again, we'll come back perhaps with more videos here as this later week threat commences, but plenty of support there for severe storms going into Thursday. So that is going to do it for now. Once again, a lot of severe weather on tap for the next several days. Again, tomorrow, enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 for parts of northwest Texas for that really large hail and damaging wind threat with the supercells out there. And then a separate area of convection along the warm front and in the warm sector, which could have a tornado threat. I think storms will tend to be a little bit messier as they train along the warm front, but still plenty of low-level shear as the event progresses, especially into the early evening hours for that tornado threat in the eastern portions of the risk. Still mostly a large hail and damaging wind threat out to the west. And there's your tornado risk for tomorrow, 5%. Does include Dallas, Fort Worth, Waco, Lufkin, Shreveport. Damaging wind and large hail, perhaps some very large hail, especially out to the west, back with that northwest Texas convection as it moves off to the east. Then we move into Tuesday, large slight risk with a 15% hatched area for potential significant severe weather down here. Again, probably back along the dry line here, western portions of the risk area dealing with more of a large hail and damaging wind risk given weaker low-level shear. But out here to the east, along the warm front and along any outflow boundaries especially, could foster that tornado threat in the open warm sector if convection is able to fire and take advantage of the stronger low-level shear. And then the threat again continues into Wednesday and Thursday. Still lots of model discrepancies for Wednesday and Thursday, so we'll come back at a later time with more updates on that. But for now, East Texas into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Western Florida Panhandle on Wednesday, and then shifting east on Thursday into parts of Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. So that's going to do it for now. For those of you traveling to see the eclipse tomorrow, stay safe out there. Enjoy the eclipse if you can. Again, looking like areas from, let me go back to our cloud maps here, looking like areas from the northeast, looking like your slam dunk area up there in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and then perhaps a little bit of a corridor there from perhaps as far south as the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex northeastward into Arkansas may be your best bet for maybe some cirrus clouds, but not too detrimental to the overall viewing experience. And then up into the Midwest, some cirrus to deal with as well. Might be a little bit thicker, but still may not totally obstruct views there from southeast Missouri northeastward into Ohio. So for those of you traveling for the eclipse, stay safe and enjoy it if you can. And then we'll buckle down for that severe threat starting tomorrow, going through the southeast into the latter portions of the week. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.